Hey, first up, I wanted to thank everyone who voted for this game in the poll of what games I should review next. That was a while ago. I'm sorry this took so long, but hopefully this was worth the wait. So growing up, I was always more of a Digimon kid than a Pokemon kid. I ate up the anime series, and I played the PS1 Digimon World games religiously at times. And a few years later, it was actually really weird to see the Digimon World game series come to the DS, but I was really happy with it. So what I didn't know was that this was actually the start of a new series in Japan called Digimon Story, and that it was changed to a World Series game in localization, likely for brand recognition, that admittedly worked very well on me because I bought the game. The Digimon Story series took a lot of cues from Digimon World 3 by focusing more on being a traditional JRPG than a virtual pet raising game. So that note gets us back around to Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth, which is actually the 5th title in this sub-series of games. That's no reason to worry though, since Cyber Sleuth's story is unrelated to the others, and it even comes from a different developer, so in a sense it's kind of a clean slate. Cyber Sleuth made it to the West in February of this year, thanks to a fan petition that I remember signing at some point, and got a PS4 version developed specifically for that Western release, which is the version I'll be reviewing today. In essence, the game is a love letter to Digimon fans, particularly those who grew up with the series, but drifted away from it at some point or another. The game features a bit of a mature cast than most of the series tends to, with more adult language and themes being explored in its story. It was really weird to see words like hell and damn in a Digimon game at first, but due to the tone and nature of the game, it quickly made a lot of sense and felt very natural, which I was pleasantly surprised with. So to really tackle the meat of this, Cyber Sleuth follows a mostly mute main character who can be male or female that becomes separated from their physical body and assumes a digital form that still kind of has a presence in the real world that can access a centralized internet server from most electronic devices. It's a bit heady, I know. If you've seen the film Summer Wars, Cyber Sleuth actually takes quite a few cues from that movie, visually and thematically, which I love as a fan of that film. But if that kind of helps give you an idea of the tone of Cyber Sleuth, there you go. The player character is quick to come into contact with Kyoko, a very eccentric yet wise woman who runs a detective agency. Using the main character's newfound digital form, the two team up to start getting to the bottom of weird events happening both online and offline. I actually really don't want to get too into detailing the story here, for the sake of letting you experience it for yourself though. The story takes some really interesting turns for a Digimon game that I wasn't expecting, and it even went down a few paths I found slightly unsettling. You know, in a good way. However, it's all not perfect. The game's story is split into 20 chapters, and I feel like for around the first 10, it really drags and meanders too much for its own good. In addition to that, there's a few issues. One thing is that characters often look to the main player character for response and input, and your character just kind of nods their head or shakes their head or just smiles and basic things like that, and it all just comes off a bit awkward. I think the idea was to let you imprint yourself onto the character, but I believe the narrative would have been a lot stronger with just letting this character be a character, instead of a mostly blank slate. Not to mention, when the game's visual novel-esque dialogue exchanges start going on long, it's a bit tiresome to just mash the A button to try and bypass your character's barely existent contributions. It's an especially strong contrast when the supporting cast are often exuberantly eccentric, and some actually go through actual character arcs. Then there's you, who's just usually silently there, yet being the guiding force for a lot of change in the game plot. It's odd. Another problem I had with the story comes down a bit more to localization than the actual plot itself. If you look at this scene here, what I presume was meant to be the word now is the word nut. And it's a little hard to imagine no one else noticing that before approving it. The game also just reads a bit awkwardly sometimes. It just seems like it was kind of just slightly adjusted from a straight Japanese to English translation, and that may not be the case, but it's hard to think of another reason for why some of it just feels so weird to read. It's kind of endearing in a way, but it definitely left me head scratching more than a few times just based on how natural it could seem. All that said though, the game narrative is a lot stronger than in most Digimon games, and when the narrative really starts moving quickly around chapter 10, it really gets its hooks in you. So while the story is much more of a focus here than it generally is in Digimon titles, the biggest focus is still on the JRPG battle mechanics and the form of Digimon raising established in earlier Digimon Story titles. I don't have too much to say about the battles themselves. There's not really anything here that you haven't seen before. Different Digimon have different types and elements they're strong and weak against. There are status conditions like poison. The move order is shown on the right from top to bottom. It's all pretty standard stuff, really. There's also an auto battle option that I never use that will make decisions for you in battle, which I can only assume is great for grinding and not much else. Now that said, as a Digimon game, you can easily get lost in a ton of grinding while trying to raise specific Digimon, so it's probably not a bad thing that it's there. Now one quick pro I'll toss in real quick though, is that this Digimon Story game finally lets you see your own Digimon in battle instead of just the enemies like in earlier titles. Thank goodness. So the actual Digimon raising mechanics are rather similar to how they were in the DS Digimon titles. Each Digimon can digivolve into a few higher stage Digimon depending on their current level and stat spread, allowing them to become even stronger and potentially digivolve again into even higher stage creatures. The experience system was boiled down into a single traditional experience stat here that I was very thankful for. If you really enjoy battling and grinding a lot, this game is for you. Now oftentimes Digimon you've just acquired can't reach a certain level due to a stat called Ability limiting their maximum level, so at points you actually have to de-digivolve your creature down a form to raise their ability stat to start the grind anew and reach a higher level overall. It's not as bad as it sounds, though there are definitely points where you'll have to set aside some time to raise a monster back up to where it was when that ability stat holds you back. Again, if you've played the DS titles, you are very familiar with this already, but I could see this being very confusing and potentially off-putting to those jumping back into Digimon after a long break, or those coming into the series for the very first time. The main thing to keep in mind actually is to not get too attached to any Digimon early on, since you'll likely be downgrading it to a different Digimon, and then potentially raising it up through an entirely different branch of Digivolution later on to see which Digimon it can turn into in other branches. The main thing that threw me off about this new Digimon system, however, is a fundamental change in how stats work. Now this is a bit of rambling, so forgive me, but I think hardcore Digimon fans watching will be able to relate to this. So going back to the first Digimon Story game, aka World DS, when you de-digivolved a monster, all of its stats would get a permanent boost depending on how high of a level you were before digivolving. So for example, a level 50 Digimon would get a nice chunk of extra power thanks to giving itself up to go to a lower form and resetting to level 1. Now this process was incredibly repeatable and it helped to give an incentive to de-digivolving and helped make it all feel worthwhile. In Cyber Sleuth, those extra stats are gone. A Digimon reset to level 1 will always have the same stats dependent on what its personality is. So it doesn't matter if you're level 2 or level 99, when you take a Digimon down a notch and reset to level 1, there's no benefit other than how much the aforementioned ability stat raises. This time around, extra stats are a bit more Pokemon-esque, where based on how high that ability stat is, a Digimon can have up to 100 additional stat points to spread, dependent on how you train it. This system isn't nearly as rewarding as how it was before, and it's just a change I wish hadn't been made. It's still okay, and it's still perfectly functional. I just wish the necessary grind in this game felt more worthwhile like it did back in the older games in the sub-series. But that's enough of that. So while you have a main party of Digimon with you at all times, with a limit of how many you have with you that you can increase with items, you also have a farm of Digimon in your Digimon lab, up to 5. Farms are also a staple of the story series, where you drop off up to 10 Digimon in each environment where you can assign them to find more side quests, to train specific stats, or to look for items that they can give to you. All the while they're leveling up depending on how much you're moving around, so it's sort of a way to train up more Digimon outside of your main party, which is pretty neat. Not much to say about those, but I respect that they still incorporated them into Cyber Sleuth. So the main bulk of exploration and progression in Cyber Sleuth comes down to navigating through very basic city environments, loosely based off real places in Japan. I especially appreciated the Club Sega appearance. There are also incredibly narrow dungeons that often require little to no thought to get through, other than dealing with random Digimon encounters. The city areas are fine enough to go through and are usually only about 2 or 3 screens deep with no real complexity. I just wish the actual dungeons were more fun and engaging, instead of just feeling like something you always have to go through to see more of the plot. None really stand out as especially creative or memorable outside of some neat visual design elements, which is a shame. Cyber Sleuth will likely keep you hooked thanks to its narrative and monster raising mechanics, but the true meat of the exploration will likely just feel like a necessary evil to get back to the things you're enjoying about the game. I do want to commend one additional thing about the game's feeling though. Cyber Sleuth was made by a lot of Digimon fans, which even according to the series producer is a bit of a rare thing, and I feel like it really shows. There's just something about it that exudes a true passion for Digimon, which I just can't help but appreciate, especially after years of games that either missed the mark or just weren't even localized to the West for us to experience. I'm hoping Cyber Sleuth marks the start of a renaissance for the Digimon series as a whole, and I hope it continues to aim for a similar audience Cyber Sleuth did and improves from there. Visually, it's important to remember that this game was ported from the PlayStation Vita, so some textures won't look fantastic when blown up to a huge HD display. However, the game still looks rather pleasant, and a bump to 60 frames per second on the PS4 definitely doesn't hurt. I can't help but imagine the game looks rather nice on the Vita regardless though. Now, if you happen to buy both versions, you can transfer your save back and forth between the two, which is a pretty nice bonus. And when it comes to the music, it's actually pretty nice too, on the whole, with some memorable tracks that I'll probably keep coming back to in the coming months. Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth won't be the best JRPG you play this year, but it's likely to be one of the best Digimon games you'll ever play, if not the best. Kind of like Digimon as a whole, it's not perfect, but it has a lot of charm and passion put into it, enough so that it's tough not to enjoy it to some degree. I'm thankful this game was localized, as I'd hate to have missed out on it due to a language barrier. I hope Bandai Namco sees fit to bring over Digimon World Next Order with due time. This series is fighting to stay alive in the West and needs all the support it can get, and with titles like Cyber Sleuth under its belt recently, it deserves it. Even if you're not into Digimon, I'd recommend at least heavily investigating into this title. With all that said, I'm MykonosFan. This has been Learning to Love PlayStation. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.